Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Workology. As we've responded to the COVID-19 crisis, safety precautions, remote working logistics, managing furloughs and layoffs, and protecting essential workers has been top of mind for HR leaders for these past few months. Let's all give ourselves a pat on the back because we are dealing with a lot. As we enter 1,000 and a million weeks of stay-at-home and shelter-in-place mandates, that's how I feel right now, stuck at home, working from home, recording this podcast at home, we are now thinking about phased reopening, as well as our essential employees. One group we've focused on is those who have a high risk of contracting the novel coronavirus, as well as a higher risk of dying from it. How can we protect employees with health conditions, such as autoimmune disease, when we have regulations against asking for personal health information under HIPAA? Today, I'm joined by Holly Bertone. She's a PMP and CNHP and the author of Thriving in the Workplace with Autoimmune Disease, Know Your Rights, Resolve Conflict and Stress. A highly sought after speaker and wellness expert and the leading authority on autoimmune disease in the workplace, Holly is the president and CEO of Pink Fortitude LLC and the founder of Fortitude Academy and the health and wellness website pinkfortitude.com. As a breast cancer and Hashimoto survivor, she turned these two significant health challenges into a passion to help transform the lives of women with chronic illness. Holly, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Jessica, thank you so much for having me on the show.
My niece actually has Hashimoto's, so I'm very familiar, as personal as can be without actually having Hashimoto's. So I am really looking forward to our interview today and our time together.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's a very misunderstood disease, as is autoimmune disease in general.
Well, you spent the first 10 years of your career in human resources, primarily as a recruiter. As an HR who has experience responding to crisis, what do you see as the primary challenge that we need to address?
You know, I think right now in this environment, the HR professionals are the unsung heroes. I mean, they're working around the clock, day and night, either hiring or firing or trying to figure out how to keep their workforce safe, making adjustments that are unprecedented. And I think also, HR lives in this world of navigating the gray area within the confines of employment law and trying to figure out their case by case scenarios and still following the law. And, this whole crisis didn't come with a playbook. I mean, there's no rules around it. And, we're in uncharted territory. And, I think everyone is absolutely doing their best, but it's difficult for all of us.
It's hard to plan for a situation that there is no playbook for.
Exactly.
How can we ensure that high-risk employees are safe right now, whether they're in essential services or working from home, when, as HR leaders and businesses, we're prohibited by HIPAA regulations from asking personal health-related questions?
Well, it's interesting. Most individuals and most employees with autoimmune disease actually don't know that they are considered having a legal disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, as most employers, managers, and HR professionals aren't aware of this as well. But in this current situation, at risk is a very common lexicon. So whether there's not an understanding of, okay, this person's covered under ADA. If they have an autoimmune disease, they understand, okay, they're an at-risk class, and we need to take extra special care of keeping them safe. But if you don't know the individual has an autoimmune disease, then that presents this whole set of problems or you may suspect someone has an autoimmune disease, but you obviously under HIPAA, if it's not already documented, you can't ask. So what I recommend is open-ended questions. One of my favorite questions that I recommend when I train employers is, how can we best support you and keep you safe during this time? I think it's a great open-ended question. It doesn't imply anything, and the employee can answer according to what best fits their needs under this situation. And the other great question to ask is, what resources do you need from us for you to help you continue to be productive? And I think that's another great one, meaning, we see you as productive. We want to keep you as productive. We want to keep you as safe.
I like that, because it doesn't necessarily say, I think you might have an autoimmune disease and I'm worried about you, but
Right.
It's more like, hey, what can we do for you? What kind
Right.
of resources do you need from us? And it doesn't specifically call that out. So you're okay in terms of the HIPAA side of things, but you also want to support your people, especially given the situation that we're dealing with right now.
Exactly.
You have a lot of personal experience, which we talked about at the beginning of the show here, in dealing with autoimmune disease. And in fact, you wrote a book on handling these challenges for employees. Can you talk a little bit about your own experience with discrimination?
Oh, absolutely. And just to give you kind of a quick background, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2010 and was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2011. So it was 1 year later. I never fully recovered from breast cancer, and it took them a full year to actually diagnose me with the Hashimoto's. And at the time, I was climbing the corporate ladder. I had done very well in the corporate environment. I was then brought on to government service. I worked for, as I say, it was one of those 3-letter government agencies that they make TV shows about. And we'll just leave it at that. And they actually brought me in as a GS-15, if anyone's familiar with the government structure. So a very high level. It was quite an honor to be brought in to be the chief of staff. So, and I'm not saying this to brag, just to give you, kind of a background. I was the quintessential overachiever, always had great reviews, everything like that. And after these 2 health challenges hit, I also was married, recently married, and also inherited a stepson. So I decided to take a step back and move out of a management position into more of an analyst role. So, I didn't have as much stress. I could kind of work on easier projects, and it was just a much better situation across the board. And for the majority of those years, my management was very accommodating as I had different flare-ups, and, would let me, work my own hours, work the hours where I could be more productive. And for me, it was coming in early and leaving early. And, it was all well and good. And then in late 2016, early 2017, we had a management change, and they wanted absolutely nothing to do with me being sick. So I did some research. I started documenting everything. I got, notes from, my physician. I was able to go on FMLA, and they ended up, long story short, rescinding my FMLA and blocking any move to transfer. So, I'm at a point where, making a very comfortable 6-figure salary. My health was at a crisis point at this time. I mean, I had some pretty bad flare-ups, and I mean, it was just, I could barely get out of bed. I could barely function. And, my management just wanted nothing to do with the whole situation. So I ended up resigning because it was, really the only option left for me. I tried to go down the EEO path, and my organization told me that, really they existed to protect the employer, not the employee. And, I just kind of decided to wash my hands clean of the whole situation and instead embark on a path of advocating for employees with autoimmune disease, because I realized that there's nothing out there. There's a ton of information out there about autoimmune disease, and there's obviously a lot of information out there about disability rights in the workplace, but there's nothing that marries the two together. So so instead of embarking on a lawsuit and going down the EEO path, I decided to kind of change course and really be an advocate for employees at the time.
I can totally relate to this, and I've talked about my own personal experience, and the reason that I do what I do is because there was a lot of misunderstanding around blogging, social media, and all the things that weren't not happening in HR, and I got fired because of my blog. So I think that sometimes these situations can really be turned into great opportunities to kind of drive awareness and help change other people's lives for the better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For our listeners who are not familiar, can you explain to us what an autoimmune disease is and maybe how it impacts those who have it?
Oh, sure. There's actually over 100 different types of autoimmune diseases. Some of them that you might be familiar with, we talked about Hashimoto's. Graves is another thyroid condition. Fibromyalgia is another common one, as is lupus, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, celiac disease. These are some that you might be familiar with. And in a nutshell, it's your immune system becomes imbalanced and it attacks itself. Autoimmune conditions they're all very different and they all manifest themselves differently to each individual. So let's say, 100 different people with lupus, they're going to manifest their symptoms differently, even though they all have lupus, if that makes sense. So it's difficult to diagnose. A lot of times the symptoms manifest other things such as hormone imbalances. It's also it's progressive, so it gets worse over time, and it's extremely unpredictable. You could be completely fine one day and have a flare-up that puts you on your back the next day and be completely fine the next day, or have flare-ups that last for months or years and without rhyme or reason. Interestingly, 75% of those with an autoimmune disease are women, and the onset is typically in your 30s and 40s, which are also the same time frame that women are, typically getting married and having children of their own, along with building their career. So it presents a unique challenge because women in that age range, they go to their doctor and they have a list of symptoms, and a lot of the symptoms are pain and fatigue and migraines and IBS. And, oftentimes it's, it's hormonal, or you're just stressed, or you're overworked. So it does take a lot to, oftentimes even several years and doctors to get diagnosed. Now, there are over 54 million Americans who are diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And I tell the employers that I work with, it's, okay, so what bearing does that have on, what bearing does that have for me? Why should I care about that number? And let me break it down to you. And I looked at the basic census numbers, and this is just a rough estimate. There are approximately 15 million Americans who are working full-time jobs with an autoimmune disease. And if you want a further elaboration, that is the equivalent of the populations of New York City plus Los Angeles plus Chicago combined. And then if you look at that population, 75% are women, 25% are men. So the women basically constitute New York City and Los Angeles, and the men are Chicago. So so that's kind of a basic 101 on autoimmune disease and who it affects.
Well, thank you. Because I feel like, we're living in this crazy world right now with COVID-19, and we hear about autoimmune disease, but we don't get a lot more information. So that's why I wanted to bring you on. And I feel like you're giving us education from an HR point of view, but also from somebody who is diagnosed with one as well. I wanted to talk to you, I want to get back to the HR side of things a little bit and talk to you about reasonable accommodation in the workplace. How do we make this happen? So if somebody has an autoimmune disease and they ask for a reasonable accommodation, where do we go from here?
So let me address this in two different ways. First of all, and I mentioned before, autoimmune disease is protected under the 2008 Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act. And it's the endocrine, lymphatic, and immune systems that's actually covered. They don't talk about autoimmune disease specifically or any specific diseases because they just need to keep it general. But it is covered. So in general circumstances, the best reasonable accommodations for someone with autoimmune disease are things like flexible hours and flexible breaks. The ability to work from home, even before all this happened, the ability to work from home is huge. And the main symptoms are pain and fatigue. So if you think of that, and individuals are going to be different. So some individuals may wake up raring to go, super amounts of energy first thing in the morning. Some individuals may take some time to kind of get moving. So, for example, you let someone come in and work on the earlier side, and then maybe instead of taking an hour lunch, give them several shorter or several breaks that are the equivalent to that hour lunch, just to kind of give them time to, either rest or to move around. The other thing too is, for example, if someone's having a flare-up, individuals with autoimmune disease are typically going to be heavy on the sick days, right? So they're not going to have a lot of extra sick days to play with. And, let's say someone with lupus has a flare-up. So under normal circumstances, they would take 8 hours and have a sick day. But if you gave them the ability to work from home, then, they might be able to work 3, 4, 5 hours in bed with a laptop and still be productive and not have to blow that full 8 hours of sick leave. So it's a win-win for everyone. And when I work with the employers, there's a whole list of different accommodations for different symptoms and, different diseases and things like that. But, but those are the biggest ones. And right now, we are in an interesting time because before COVID hit, like I said, most individuals with autoimmune disease and most employers didn't know that they were legally covered. But now we have this whole lexicon of an at-risk population. So even if they're not aware, obviously listening to this, you are aware, but even if you weren't aware, that is legally covered as a disability in the workplace, you do understand the concept of at-risk population and are wanting to keep your employees safe. And, obviously right now, everyone's recommending to stay at home.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast sponsored by Workology. Today, we're talking about supporting employees with autoimmune disease with Holly Bertone.
Are you tired of putting your professional development on the back burner? It's time for you to invest in yourself with Upskill HR by Workology. We're a membership community focused on personal development for HR. Gain access to our elite community, training, coaching, and events. Learn more at upskillhr.com.
I feel like a lot of HR professionals, I would hope that they are familiar with the term of reasonable accommodation. The group of people that I'm more worried about in our workplaces and businesses is the managers. So what can we do, or what should HR leaders do to maybe get the word out or educate or help inform those managers on what they can and can't do when it comes to somebody who is asking for a reasonable accommodation that has an autoimmune disease?
I'm actually glad that you asked that because, like you said, HR managers are very aware of reasonable accommodations and, and providing this to employees. Managers sometimes not as much, and this is kind of where we get into the double-edged sword because you have a population of employees who don't consider themselves disabled and maybe aren't aware that they do have rights in the workplace. So they're going to come to work. They are going to, have days that they're feeling really rough and suffer, and their productivity and their work product may suffer as well. And they may not know that they can ask, and their managers are going to look at them and, start dinging them on their performance reviews or start coming down hard on them. So it really is a double-edged sword. And, I think education is really key. It's why I train employers on autoimmune disease in the workplace, because it is so, it's not out there. People aren't talking about it. And, it really needs to be brought to the forefront. And oftentimes managers are dismissive because, let me put it to you this way. If an employee walks into a manager, not HR, just a general manager, and, the employee had, was blind or in a wheelchair. And I'm not saying any disabilities better or worse than others. I'm just trying to make a point. That manager would instinctively know, okay, I need to do something. I need to provide, a ramp or provide braille or, a reader or something along those lines, right? Autoimmune disease is an invisible disability. So when an employee comes in, they may not be feeling well. The way that they can verbalize it is, I don't feel good or I'm tired. And that manager is going to look at the employee and rightfully so say, drink more coffee, take a pill, get more sleep. I was up with the kids. I'm tired too. So a lot of it is just understanding and education from both sides. So, number one, obviously, is education and educating the HR managers, understanding that autoimmune disease is a legal disability in the workplace, educating the management team and the line managers on autoimmune disease, what it is, and how we can accommodate these employees. And then also listening and understanding, especially during these times, you're going to have employees who are, who are coming in, who are scared and, don't know how to, they might be afraid to say what they're afraid about. So, with the fears and the risks and everything like that. So, I think education, I think listening and an understanding.
One of the reasons why I asked you this question is because in Reddit and Facebook groups and just chats and different things that I'm a part of online right now, I am seeing a lot of HR leaders, and I know people are going to shake their head as soon as they hear what I'm about to say because they're dealing with this right now, are dealing with a lot of people who are asking for time off work, whether it is if they qualify for the FFCRA or not. And there's a lot of, or they think there is a lot of people who are abusing the system. I would like to remind everyone, and one of the reasons I wanted Holly on here was to remind people and our HR leaders and our managers that we can't make assumptions, and we do have to go through the appropriate steps for documentation before we can deny or accept someone to take paid or unpaid time off in accordance with the FFCRA or the FMLA or for whatever reason. I think it's important for us to not just jump to a conclusion, and it's hard because in HR we see the worst, I think, of a lot of situations and we never get to talk about it. But let's just be open. There will be abuse, and handle those things accordingly, but don't immediately make an assumption that somebody is abusing the system because they don't look like they have a visible disability.
Exactly.
What are some ways that autoimmune disease can impact employee morale, turnover, or productivity? I know you talked a little bit about your own perspective, but how does that impact these things in your workplace and your culture?
Oh, sure. Actually, can I add one more thing to the last question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Individuals with autoimmune disease are at risk 24/7, even before COVID happened. So now that we're in this current situation, a lot of individuals with autoimmune disease are living in fear because they are at higher risk. I mean, you wake up every day and your body's battling against itself. So you wake up every day, already, kind of down for the count, right? So having something out there that's an unknown and unpredictable that can potentially cause harm and not just make you sick, but those who are at risk oftentimes get much, much sicker, right? We hear a lot of people that, have mild symptoms, individuals who have an autoimmune condition. When we get sick, we get really sick. So we're living in extra fear, and the stress of the situation. Stress causes an inflammatory response, which increases the amount of flare-ups. So, I just really want to put an exclamation point on what you said, in that, individuals may not want to come to work because they are literally scared for their lives. So have that open conversation. Think of the best first before we go to the worst case scenario in talking to that employee.
I just keep reading all these horror stories, and a lot of times HR people are getting the information secondhand. They haven't talked to the employee yet. They just know they haven't got any type of doctor documentation in the mail so that somebody can go on their 14-day FFCRA leave, and so immediately they jump to, I think this person's lying, or they produced a fake doctor's note that they bought on the internet. That's not always the case.
Yeah. But that also goes and point to the question that you just asked about employee morale and turnover and productivity. When you have an employee who's scared to come to work, that impacts morale. With what I went through, and we worked in a little cube farm. My neighbors were 2 feet away from me. We knew everything going on with each other, right? And when my coworkers saw me being targeted by my managers, they were scared too. So, it's not just the morale from the individual, but also the collective in the office. And, when managers and honestly, they mean well, they just don't have the education, right? I hear so many times, take a pill, drink more coffee, you're lazy, you're tired, you're faking it. And that really does impact not just the morale of the individual, but the entire office when they see this going on. And, and like I said, these reasonable accommodations can really help to, boost that productivity and decrease those sick days. Hey, you can work from home. And we are in an environment now where the recommendation is for everyone to work at home. So where a lot of jobs were originally thought, okay, we can't work from home with this job, HRs and managers and employers have figured out a way to make it happen. So individuals with autoimmune disease have benefited from this greatly. And, going forward, I just, really hope that we are in a place that we can continue, this conversation that, hey, I was able to work from home. I was able to be productive. I am at risk. I have an autoimmune disease. Can I continue to work from home, several days a week and, maybe have more flexible hours when, we just proved for the last few months that it can happen. So I think we're in a really great position right now for individuals with autoimmune disease to really thrive in the workplace and for employers to have that understanding.
I don't think we're going to go back to the way it was before.
Yeah, I have
COVID-19.
No idea what our new normal is going to be.
No, nobody does, and if they do, I want to hear from you because yeah. I'm gonna go to Vegas when it opens. I'm gonna put some money down on something. Holly, where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing? Where's the best place?
Oh, sure. You can go to workwithfortitude.com. It'll take you right to our workplace wellness portal. And then also fortitude.academy, where I provide training for employers and employees on autoimmune disease in the workplace.
We'll link in the resources section to Holly's LinkedIn profile as well as other resources that she has available. So you'll be able to connect with her. And I encourage you to connect with her after listening to this podcast. Thank you again for taking the time to talk to us, Holly. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jessica, for having me on.
This pandemic crisis has turned our economy on its head and created a lot of confusion for companies and human resources in particular. There is no guide or playbook for responding to a crisis like this one, and most of us, I know I haven't, have never experienced anything like this in our lifetime. We all want to ensure that our employees are healthy and protected, whether that looks like making accommodations for essential workers or extending remote work options for our most vulnerable population. I appreciate Holly joining us today and giving us insights into how we can better support employees with autoimmune disease. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast sponsored by Workology. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, visit Workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes. Workology podcast episodes. Workology podcast episodes. Workology podcast episodes.